Congressman Jerry Litton believes that a democracy depends on informed people. He also believes our government should be more open and accessible to the people. To better inform you of what is happening in your government, Missouri's 6th District Congressman Jerry Litton invites Washington personalities to come to Missouri each month and join him in an unrehearsed, question and answer, open to the public town meeting to discuss key issues facing our nation. Dialogue with Litton brings you closer to your government and Washington closer to you.
You know, we started these meetings about 4 years ago, and the crowds have been large time and time again. And as most of you know, we've had smaller mini-type dialogues all over the district for nearly 4 years. We've had them in gift shops and courthouses and any place that we could hold them in each of the 23 counties. Just a few days ago, we started to hold dialogues like this all over the state, but not the televised form. We didn't know if anybody would really show up. The first one of these we held Sunday night, eastern Jackson County, Kansas City. We expected about 150 people would be there, and we had 800. And the following night, Monday night, we had our second of this sort, and encouraged by the previous attendance, we planned for 300. We had 1,200 people show up. And then Wednesday night, we had our third. This time we set up for 400, and 800 people showed up in Columbia, Missouri. And we had to turn away 150 that couldn't even get in the room. And we have a number of these kind of dialogues scheduled all over the state of Missouri. And I think it would suggest that people care about their country or interested in their government if you permit them to participate in it. Of course, that's what these meetings are for, to permit people to participate in their government, to ask questions, to engage in a discussion with those who represent them. We have a really, truly good representative of the people, and a representative in Congress is our guest today. He's a gentleman who first gained national attention when he uncovered and brought to the attention of the people the existence of the famed tiger cages in South Vietnam. He was an administrative aide to a U.S. congressman, ran for Congress himself, won the seat in Iowa that is adjacent to mine here in Missouri. He's a member of the Energy Research Subcommittee, a subject we're all vitally concerned about and interested in. Knowledgeable in foreign affairs, a member of the Agriculture Committee. He's one of the real comers in the United States Congress. You're going to be reading and hearing a lot about our guest today. Let's welcome to Missouri from Iowa, Congressman Tom Harkin. Tom? Good old Iowa fight. Yeah. I'm going to hire that band and bring it to Iowa.
You know,
it's good to have you in Missouri, Tom.
good to be here. I think the biggest trick is not to get tangled up in these cords, though, Jerry. I broke my neck, I think, getting up.
Well, every time we bring a Republican, they have no trouble with it.
Yeah, right. All right.
We simply let people come up, Tom, and ask questions, and never know what questions they might ask. I'd like to ask the people to come to the microphone, give your name and your town, and whatever question you'd care to ask.
Sure.
And we'll see what happens. Let's get this question right here.
Sure.
Yes, I'm Roy Spear. I work for TWA. First thing I'd like to say, Jerry, is I equate you with Harry Truman and being able to take a message to the people and get our government back to the people where it should be. The question I have is, the air industry is one of the first industries to be affected by a recession and one of the last industries to recover from a recession. And I would like to know how the government will, or how deregulation is expected to have an effect on the airline industry in general.
I think it would be well for me to comment on deregulation in the broad big picture, and I think we would better understand it. And deregulation by itself sounds good because the words are the kind of words we like to hear. Right to work sound good because the words are the kind of words we like to hear. When you look behind each of those words, then you have to ask some very serious, hard questions. Postal Service has a monopoly. And there would be some who would suggest, well, why don't we let private enterprise and private business compete with them? UPS, for example, can deliver parcels around the United States better, more cheaply, more efficient than the Postal Service. One of the reasons being that they pick the more profitable routes to move their product, and they don't offer any service between Wonka Wonka, Wyoming, and Yucca Yucca, Idaho, you know. That's right. And that's up to the Postal Service. They've got to deliver that little letter for 13 cents from that town to the other town, and you and I both know it costs more than that. So if we did give free enterprise the opportunity to compete with the Postal Service, they would step in and take the more profitable routes, and it'd cost you $2 to $3 to mail a letter if you happen to live in one town and wanted to move it to another town where not much mail was being moved. Telephone is another situation. There's legislation now pending that would take away the right of the monopoly of the telephone industry and let other industries come in and compete. What would happen? They would take your more profitable routes where people do a lot of calling, and that would mean that we would drive up the cost of having a telephone in every private home substantially, because the more profitable lines you see would be operated by private enterprise. REA, Mr. Goldwater, back in the election in '64, wanted to take away some of the better routes of the REA that were serving urban areas and give them to the public utilities. What would have happened? They would have left the long-range, long-distance, less profitable electrical routes to the REA, and farmers in America would have had to go back to kerosene. Now, the same thing's true with trucks and with the airlines. It sounds good. Let's deregulate. What happens? Private people come in the trucking business, take the profitable truck routes, and you just try to get a truck to move a product from Gilman City to Jamesport.
Well, if you realize
that,
I mean? then why don't other people realize it?
Well, that's a good question because the answer I just gave you is not a very popular answer. It's much better to run against the monopolies of the telephone, of the trucks, of aviation, of the Postal Service, and to give speeches just the opposite from what I just gave to you. I think the vast majority in Congress do understand, but it's not popular to answer the question the way I did.
Well, if I just might elaborate a little bit, I agree with Jerry on that point. I think that a lot of our faith in the regulatory process in this country, in regulating whether it's airlines or trucks or drugs or whatever it might be, would be enhanced. Our faith would be enhanced in these regulatory processes if we would stop what I call the revolving door syndrome that we have in Washington. The head of the biggest drug company becomes the head of the regulatory agency that regulates the drug companies. And when he's through, he goes out the revolving door and takes over the drug company again. And it's the same way even in our airlines and even in our trucking things too, that many times the regulators then are become, or have been in the past, the people who would benefit the most from those regulations. I think there has to be more of a public input into the regulatory process in this country.
Why doesn't our government protect their own industry? They're letting foreign interests take over and drive a lot of our own industries out of business. And I don't understand it. And I think a lot of people don't understand it.
I addressed that subject the last dialogue we had here and pointed out how much more our airlines are charged for each landing in a foreign country than we charge their airlines to land here, how much more we pay their airlines to carry the mail than we pay our airlines, and how we permit foreign airlines to buy American-made 747s at a subsidized low-interest long-term rate and force American airlines to pay the going rate. And I would suggest to you that much of it is designed to buy friends abroad. And we've pursued that kind of policy for a long time, and I think it's time to be changed.
I'm Dixie Harrington from Harrison County, Missouri, and Decatur County, Iowa. And because Speaker Albert is retiring and Tip O'Neill is expected to run for Speaker and be elected, I wonder what the situation will be like with regard to Majority Leader, and particularly the chances that Congressman Bowling might be elected as Majority Leader.
Number one, I predict Tip O'Neill will be the Speaker. Nothing but a bolt of lightning would stop that. Now,
we've had a few bolts lately, though.
We've had a few bolts. I know a lot of congressmen are creating typing courses for their secretaries now. I saw a newspaper the other day that pointed out that we ought to keep in mind that from all of the things that we've learned, you should notice that the Republicans do it for money, the Democrats do it for fun. Maybe that's why the Republicans have more money.
And there are more Democrats.
That's why there are more Democrats. But to the question, Tip O'Neill, in my opinion, will be the Speaker. He's a man who understands the workings of the House. He took the seat formerly held by President John Kennedy. He understands not only legislative affairs, but he understands the political process and the manner in which laws are written and the way to get legislation through the House. And he's a man who's willing to take a position. I would say this, that there is no one in the House better equipped to be Majority Leader or Speaker in terms of knowing the rules of the House, knowing his work and knowing the job and knowing the legislative process better than Dick Bowling. Unfortunately, to be Majority Leader, one has to have the votes of his colleagues. And because of that, I'm of the opinion that Dick will not be the next Majority Leader.
I am involved in a sham marriage, and the Immigration Department seems to feel that they are short-handed, short-budgeted, and there's a very poor way of expediting the situation so that the families involved can get back to a sane way of living. I am aware of other girls that have got caught in a similar situation as I have. We've found out that the gentlemen that told us how much they loved us and wanted to marry us for 100 years have a wife, families, and they are using us as a vehicle to come into America. Now, I love my America. Please don't misunderstand. And I want for others to love America, too. Is there anything that can be done?
Get rid of General Chapman would be the first one. General Chapman is the head, General Chapman is the head of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. And you're right, the Immigration and Naturalization Service is a mess. And I think the reason it's a mess is simply because we have not focused any attention upon it. We just sort of let it go. I don't think the people of this country really realize the magnitude of the problem that's encountered by people that want to either come to this country, either to go to school for a short period of time and go back, or those people that want to come here to live.
Is there any pressures that can be brought to bear now? I want my life back to normal. I want to enjoy my family. I want to have my phone number in the phone book. I want to go into a grocery store in the old places I used to go to. I want my father's name back here in Kansas City.
Where?
Here in Kansas City.
Have you been in touch with, I guess Dick Bowling would be your congressman, would he?
He is now, you will be shortly.
I'm beginning to like you better all the time. In that case, why don't you write me? I was going to suggest that you contact Dick Bowling, but you persuaded me. But if you would write, and let me suggest this, and this is a tough thing, but if the various federal agencies were more accessible and did the kind of job they're supposed to do, there would be less need for the average citizen to have to write their congressman to get him to do, or get the agency to do for the congressman, for the people, what the agency should have done anyway. But that's not the way it is. So if you'll write me, we'll start to work on it.
Connie Davis from Springfield, Missouri. Some people are considering you a rural candidate, Jerry. How do you propose to get the city vote in August?
Well, y'all don't know me very well. Actually, my district that I represent involves over half of the geographic area of Kansas City. And I've represented over half of the land area of Kansas City for both terms in Congress. 17% of the population of Kansas City lies in my district. And many people in this immediate area recognize that. Unfortunately, over in St. Louis and some of the other areas, they look upon my district as being essentially rural, because I was born in a town of 84 people and raised in a town of 10,000 and now live in the city of Washington, D.C. So I suspect that the only way I'll convince them that I'm other than rural is to be able to intelligently discuss the problems of urban America with them. I happen to be on the District of Columbia Committee, and that committee involves itself in the running of the District of Columbia. I'm on the subcommittees of transportation and commerce and housing and some of those committees that deal with the workings and the management of the city of the District of Columbia. So it's really very difficult to shake an image.
And the same thing was thrown up to me. I was born and raised in a town of 189 people, so I'm a big city boy compared to you, Jerry.
Yeah.
And someone asked me once the same question about, well, you're from a rural area and you're more oriented towards agriculture and everything. How can you have a feeling for us people that live in Council Bluffs in the city? And I said, well, you like to eat, don't you? I said, yeah. I said, well, that's how I can represent you, because I know what it takes to get the farmers to produce the kind of food that you want to eat. And I think that's one thing that Jerry has done a good job of in Congress, in Washington, and in fact throughout the United States, is by showing that that the interests of farmers are not diametrically opposed to the interests of the people that live in the cities. You know, we're all in this boat together.
I was born and raised in the town of Lock Springs. You were talking about how big your town was. Our town never did grow. We tried urban renewal, and we put in one-way streets, and everybody left. Nobody could come back. It just never did grow. Every time a baby was born, a man would leave town. It would just kind of... So you know those towns.
I know those towns.
Congressman Litton, is it your intention as Senator of the state of Missouri to continue to hold monthly dialogues with Litton? And part two, would you then give other areas of Missouri, such as St. Louis, the benefit of these meetings?
We'd like to give them the benefit of them now. Yes, I indicated that after the election, we intend to hold meetings monthly, but the televised versions would be held every third month, Kansas City, St. Louis, and outstate. But I'd like to continue to conduct these kind of meetings that are not necessarily televised all over the state, because that's where I get my input. That's where I listen to people. And this is what I'm bothered about with public officials. Too many of them consider themselves too good for the people. They don't want to listen to the people. They want to look down on the people. And I've always considered myself no better than those that I represent. As a matter of fact, not so good, because they're my employers and I'm their employee, and I never overlook that fact. And that's the way it ought to be. And that's why I like these kind of meetings. You're putting me on the spot. I'm not putting you on the spot. People come to the mic to challenge me. And that's the way it ought to be, because I'm working for you. And I'm afraid a lot of public officials don't consider it that way, and they consider themselves better and superior to the people they work for. That needs to be changed.
You know, I had a young man a couple of years ago when I was campaigning. I was doing some work days. I won't go into that, but I was out working on a job with this young guy, and we got to talking about government, and I said, well, tell me, I said, what's your opinion of me, or what's your opinion, and what do you think about people that represent you in Washington, you know? And he thought a second, and he said, well, I'll tell you. He said, you people, you get elected to office, He said, you go to Washington, you get a nice plush office, they give you a big desk, and people open doors for you, and they call you Congressman this and Congressman that. He said, hell, you forget what your name is, you know, it's Congressman something, you know. And he said, the problem is, he said, you go there, and he said, you forget who you are, and you forget where you come from, and you forget who sent you there. He said, that's what's wrong with Washington. So I think these kinds of programs, where you get back with the people to constantly remind us where we come from and who sent us there, is vital if we're going to continue our system of government in this country.
And in this country of ours, our citizenry is given the most opportunity and freedom of any country in the world, and perhaps even in history. And yet there seems to be a growing concern for many of us that many people expect something for nothing from the government. And I believe the indication on this is the growing welfare and crime rate persistent throughout the country. And I would like to know what you feel the federal government's role can be in helping the states eliminate or diminish this problem.
Welfare rate in this country has gone up markedly. We now have about 50 million out of the 250 million, 15 million Americans who are on welfare. The total welfare program has just been put together hopscotch over the last 20 or 30 years. But basically, to respond to your question on welfare, I'm convinced, as I've been all along, that we've got to create one overall welfare system, one structure under one umbrella, eliminate all of the duplication and waste, require everybody on welfare except those too old or unable to work, to accept a job, or accept public work, or not qualify for welfare. Period. Let's start there. Let me make one quick comment about crime, and then Tom can comment here too. I think we're going to have to be a bit more firm than we have been in the past. I think we're going to have to establish some mandatory sentencing for some specific crimes and specific instances where people, in a calculating way, know precisely what they're doing. Drug abuse. This concerns me. We're not talking about a man that goes out and kills another human being in the heat of emotion, may never have done it before, probably never do it again, who gets life in prison. We're talking about people that sell hard drugs, that knowingly take the life of hundreds of people, wrecking the life of thousands of people. They're not doing it under emotional stress. They're doing it in a cool, calculated fashion. They're doing it for profit. And let me tell you something, in my opinion, if they're going to calculate the odds, the cost, the profit, and consider the lives that they're going to take in what I consider mass murder, included in their calculation ought to be the realization that if they're caught and convicted, they're going to face life in prison, which in my opinion is what it ought to be. You know, last year, and Tom, this is very interesting, last year the federal government picked up about 8,000 people for marketing drugs. They had only 3,900 indictments, they had 2,800 convictions, and of those only 1,700 people were sentenced to prison, which means that we had 40% of the people picked up with the federal government, indicted and convicted, that ever served any time. The penalty is maximum 15 years and $25,000 fine. Now, can you imagine us having a penalty for somebody murdering somebody in a bank holdup, $25,000 fine? And that's what we do for people that move in hard drugs that take the lives of thousands, and it doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't. Go ahead.
I can't add anything to that. It says it all.
Is a sex scandal in Washington as bad as the news media says it is? And if so, what can be done about it?
You know, I remember back when we had Shirley Chisholm here on our program, and the question that was asked of Shirley had to do with whether or not women could participate in politics and equal rights and the ERA and all of those things. And then the young lady asking the question said, well, Miss Chisholm, how can we stop this sex between men and women? I never did hear Shirley answer that question. I'm not sure I'm going to answer his. I would make this observation and do it sincerely. When I considered to run for public office, my wife and I talked about it at great length, and one of the factors that we considered most carefully was the realization that we no longer really would have a private life. That if we went to church or didn't go to church, or where we went to church, if she wore a dress, or what she wore, what she said, or what she didn't say, what she should have said but didn't say, what I said but ought not have said, everything you see is up for criticism. And that was the most difficult thing for me to weigh, to decide to give up that private life and run for public office. And let me say this, in view of the circumstances of the last few years, realizing that the people serving in public office have been taken apart, I don't know, faced with the same set of circumstances today, then as they are today, whether or not I would have elected to have given up my private life and gone into public office. I don't know. Frankly, that's bad. It's too bad. Public officials are not provided the normal protection of law that are given to private citizens. If an individual wants to make a claim against a public official, even though it is wrong, or create a rumor, even though it is wrong, we cannot sue and collect unless we can prove that they did it with malice. And it's almost impossible to prove that. On the other hand, if someone were to say something about a businessman downtown and it was right, he could sue and collect, even though it was right, if he was able to prove that it did damage to his business and his character. So public officials are standing up there naked. They have very little protection under the law. People can say all kinds of things about them. They can be wrong, and you cannot protect your family or your reputation unless you can prove they did it intentionally to damage you, and that's almost impossible to prove. My question is this: how many people will not be running for office this year or next that ought to, because of the events that have taken place in the last 2 or 3 years? I think the people have to be aware of this. I'm not sure I would have, frankly.
Thank you, Congressman Litton.
It's very disappointing for me. It's very discouraging. And I think it's what Jerry said. You know, how many people that are now younger, that are in high school or perhaps in college, that wanted to get into the political system, that wanted to work in government, are saying, you know, I'm not going to put up with that now. You know, but you know, it only takes 1 or 2 bad apples to do it. You know, there's 535 members of Congress, 435 in the House and 100 in the Senate. I'm always reminded of what my county sheriff said in the county I live in. He said, well, he said, out of 535 people, he said, a couple, 3 doing that. He said, that's not so bad. He said, we've got a small town down here of about 535 people, and I can name you about 4 or 5 people down there doing the same thing, you know. And, but, you know, when it happens to a congressman, it becomes news.
Well, I've enjoyed visiting with Tom. We do sit together on the committee and have enjoyed a good relationship. I don't use that word loosely. I hope not. In Washington. And I want to wish him the best, and let me suggest to you that those who know him and know him well have made very good predictions as to where he might go in the Congress, and I'm a great fan of his, and he's a kind of a guy that we need more of in the United States Congress, and I'm proud to have you here.
Thank you.
We're going to have dialogues like this all over the state of Missouri, and if you can't be with us at this or at other meetings, we hope you can join us on television, on the some 30 television and radio stations around the Midwest that carry the program. Come back with us again when we again bring government back to the people. Thank you.
You have been watching Dialogue with Litton, now in its 4th year of taking government to the people. Congressman Jerry Litton believes that government should be more open and accessible to the people, that people should have more say in their government. That's what Dialogue with Litton is all about. Be sure to continue to watch it on this station.